Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Spiritual Care Community of Practice. We have a wonderful session for you today on spirituality of grief and bereavement. Before we do get into the presentation, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that the land on which I am presenting from, the city of Gatineau, is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabeg people. I acknowledge the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. So very briefly, the Palliative Care ECHO Project is a 5-year national initiative to cultivate communities of practice and establish continuous professional development among healthcare providers across Canada who care for patients with life-limiting illness. We invite you to stay connected and check out our website at echopalliative.com. And the ECHO Project is supported by a financial contribution from Health Canada. Therefore, the views expressed here do not necessarily represent the views of Health Canada. Many of you might know Pallium for our LEAP courses. Predominantly, our LEAP core is one of our most popular ones. It is an interprofessional course that focuses on the essential competencies to provide a palliative care approach. It can be delivered online or in person and is accredited with both the CFPC and the Royal College. We do invite you to check out our website at Pallium on the LEAP Core courseware if you'd like more information. So as you can see, it is our 5th session today within this community of practice, and we have one more session to go. So we are very, very excited at the turnout, and this community of practice is definitely one that we would love to see return. A few welcome and reminders. Please introduce yourselves in the chat, and I do see the chat is moving, so I think that you are already doing that. Your microphones are muted. There will be time at the end of the session when you can unmute yourself for questions and discussion. You are welcome to use, again, just focus on the chat for introductions or whatnot. And for any questions as well, please feel free to include them into the chat, and we will keep track of that and address them at the end of the presentation. Remember not to disclose any personal health information during the session, and the session is being recorded and will be emailed to registrants within the next week or so. I will go over some of the disclosures. So as mentioned before, we are partially funded by Health Canada. Pallium is also a non-for-profit organization. We also generate funds to support operations and research and development from the sale of our pocketbook and course registration fees. I myself, along with our presenter today and panelists, have nothing to disclose, as you can see on the slide before you. And the scientific committee had complete independent control over the development of the content that you will see here today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Diana Vince. I am the Palliative Care ECHO Project Manager, and I will pass it on to our presenter and our panel to briefly present themselves. Go ahead, Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Barnes, and I'm a psychospiritual therapist in a private practice in St. John's. I have approximately 30 years working in healthcare and university settings as a spiritual care practitioner and a teaching supervisor educator in spiritual care. So those are the qualifications that I bring. I live in St. John's, Newfoundland, Labrador, and I'm pleased to be your presenter. I've specialized in grief and bereavement for approximately the last 10 years and, well, really 13 years now, including my private practice. So thank you, and it's great to be here.
It's great to have you, Peter. Sheila, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Sheila Atkinson. I am a certified spiritual care practitioner and also a registered psychotherapist in Ontario. And my current role is in a grief support role at Sick Kids Hospital, where we provide quite an extensive grief support program that is both within the context of palliative care and the anticipated and living losses, as well as support to families beyond that. And I'm happy to be part of this as we go along this new journey with a new community of practice.
And we are so glad to have you, Sheila. Our other two panelists might be arriving later on during the session. I will briefly go over the session learning objectives for you. So, once that this session has ended, we are hoping that, you will be able to consider how one approaches one's own significant losses, explore your willingness and capacity to hold tight the losses of others, manage holding one's own losses and the losses of others together, and share one's questions and suggestions with another, along with exploring complicated or traumatic grief and spirituality. So without further ado, I will now pass it along to our presenter. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you, Sheila. And it's good to be on this webinar today. I specifically have the kind of the footnote, grace and sacredness of companioning people with a life-limiting illness and people who are grieving losses. I consider this to be the idea of companioning people in grief. And you may, through this presentation, say, well, where's the palliative care here? Well, the palliative care is in the grief, lots of times in the care of our clients who have cancer or heart failure or Lou Gehrig's disease or whatever it is that is their life-limiting illness. They are experiencing grief. I can remember my own dad in 1995 when he got a diagnosis. And I went with my mom and dad to see the specialist, the cancer specialist, and he was given a stage 4 diagnosis of lung cancer. I remember that vividly. And as a result, I know that the grief work started from the day that they went for that appointment, and maybe even before that, because they anticipated it before. So it's to say that to be mindful that in this presentation, I'm not just talking about clients who have experienced the death of a loved one, but I'm also talking about the families and the friends and the patient or client themselves who are grieving because life is changing and it's very difficult for many people. So to kind of give you that preface. Next, please. Why are you here? Well, perspectives to ponder. Ask yourself, how do you relate to this question? Can caring for a dying person, their family, their friends, or caring for a person with serious losses really be an experience, a pathway to a new and different way of life for you as a professional caregiver? Just give a moment to yourself to consider that. A pathway to a new and different view of life. I've learned so much from the people that I've worked with, both active work with the dying as well as the work I do with those who are bereaved. Next, please. The journey of life may be described as a spiritual journey. And that's the way I'm seeing this. And I want to preface it that I believe in the life, that the cycle of life is birth, death, and rebirth. It's like a circle. My old office, there was trees outside my old office, and I'd watch the trees In the spring of the year, there'd be buds. Then there'd be leaves. Then the leaves would drop off in the fall, and there'd be nothing on those trees for the winter. Lo and behold, in the spring, there was buds on the trees, and they broke forth, and there was leaves. This is the cycle of our lives. And it's like life has bookends, birth and death. And the life journey, we call it, is a journey of changes. And sometimes those changes are traumatic, and sometimes they are complicated. And so it is, birth represents the passage to new life. Parents experience a new life, a baby, and life gets transformed. And the other bookend is death. So this is another way of looking at it. And so in this webinar, we will have a spiritual approach, and we'll endeavor to represent how the grief process experienced through the dying and the death of a loved one may represent a transformative experience and a passage to new life. A transformative experience and a passage to new life. And that might be called a spiritual pathway. I learned, especially from nurses over the years, the importance of clinical pathways. So that's been my model. What is the spiritual pathway here? When you consider somebody that you've worked with, what's been your spiritual pathway? Because everyone has a soul. Everyone, that's my belief. Everyone has a soul, so there has to be spirituality in people's lives, whether that's the spirituality of nature, the spirituality of religion, or the spirituality of philosophy, or the spirituality of just what is the meaning of life. Everyone has something. So therefore, what is their pathway? And how is a diagnosis going to change or transform that pathway? And what is the new life? What is the passage to new life? So these are really, really soul-searching questions that I put to you and hope that you will reflect on as we proceed through this presentation. Next, please. I want now to share with you an audio tape that happened about 15, maybe even as much, almost 20 years, possibly. Some of you may remember the Preston Manning had a program on CBC Radio called This I Believe. Well, once it was Dr. Balfremont, who may be known to many of you, especially those that work in palliative care, know Balfremont as the founder of palliative care in Canada, professor emeritus at McGill University. And so I want to play this for you because what he says is profound, and I'd like you to hear it and experience what he's saying. Thank you.
I believe in healing. I'm not speaking of physical healing. A person can die healed. What I mean by healing is a shift away from anguish and suffering toward an experience of integrity, wholeness, and inner peace. The ultimate goal of healing is to enable us to be of greater service to others and to the global village of which we are temporary trustees. My thoughts have been shaped by multiple personal brushes with death, a plane crash, 3 cancers and all that follows those diagnoses, a heart attack, the death of loved ones, my work as a cancer surgeon, the privilege of caring for the dying over the last 3 decades. Paradoxically, the message emerging from these experiences has been about living, not dying. I believe that healing, like love, celebration, awe, and ecstasy, happens in the present moment, free from our ruminations about the past and fears for the future. It involves letting go, a leap of faith, diving, not drowning, as Carl Jung expressed it. The ALS patient Phil Simmons called it learning to fall. We fall from head to heart, from egoism and defense mechanisms to forgiveness of ourselves and others. We may thus come to glimpse the staggering potential of our essential selves and experience an awareness of the healing connections that provide meaning, hope, and a sense of inner peace. I believe healing connections happen at 4 levels. A sense of connection to self, connection to others, connection to the world perceived through our senses, as with music or the grandeur of nature, and connection to ultimate meaning, however perceived, God, the more, the cosmos. While my experience of the first of these, connection to self, is slowly unfolding, I have throughout life been enriched beyond measure through each of the other domains. In spite of this, I have too often felt trapped by circumstances, stuck with the why me, why now, what if questions of life. I believe my challenge is to open to each moment with acceptance, to listen to my intuition, to develop self-reflective skills, to be more gentle with myself, to think small, to give up illusions of control. I believe healing involves a process of opening, slowing, centering, trusting, and accepting. This process leads us away from preoccupation with all that has been lost to a clearer recognition of the potential that remains. Finally, I believe that I must take up the journey toward healing anew each day. The renowned Jewish scholar Hillel put it succinctly, "If I don't do it, who will do it? If I don't do it now, when will I do it?" For this I believe, I'm Balfour Mount in Montreal.
Next, please. I want to zero in on what Balfour Mount has just said, and it's just an excerpt from what he said. We may thus come to glimpse the staggering potential of our essential selves and experience an awareness of the healing connections that provide meaning, hope, and a sense of inner peace. This is what I'm talking about, the spiritual foundation of the grief process. 2 very important words that come out of this are relationship and trust. As caregivers, especially, if we're working with people who are at risk of complicated and traumatic grief, we have to establish meaningful relationships and we have to establish trust. These are core to the healing that I believe Balfour Mount is talking about. And he represents the essence of that. His own journey of the four happenings that he referred to in terms of his close death experiences. So it's really about acknowledging the vulnerability and the genuineness of our clients. And facing death or working with grief can really bring this to the forefront of people in terms of their vulnerability and their genuineness. And we must treat them with respect and love, and to honor that in order for the healing to happen, in order for us to create that relationship and trust. Next, please. So the next section that I'm going to go through is, these are resources for you to consider. And again, there's none that are the be-all and end-all. But we need to develop toolkits to draw on. And so these represent some of the things that I have found really helpful in my caring presence, my caring practice of caring for people who are grieving, either before the death of a loved one or after the death of a loved one. Next, please. This is William Worden's 4 tasks of mourning. And they're not sequential, they just are. So when I care for people, first thing I ask myself, are they accepting the reality of what has happened? Are they accepting the reality of what is happening in the case of somebody who has a life-limiting illness? That's a big question. Are they accepting it? And you'll know when they are accepting it, because lots of times they go off in all other directions and really are not identifying the seriousness of what is happening. And then there's the acceptance. I'm just having difficulty reading my slide. Acknowledging the pain. That's acknowledging the pain and suffering of someone. You know how often, and I'm sure you've seen it in funeral homes, especially when people try to wax over what's happened and say they're there now, and they try to make excuses for why a person is grieving. And the reality, like it's acknowledging the pain and the suffering that people are experiencing in their grief is so important, and that's what people need, is to have that honored and respected. And then there's the adjusting to the environment without the loved one. And that means, like, if you visit the homes of people who are grieving, you see sometimes they set the place setting at the dinner table for somebody who has died. And that's the way they have of adjusting. And one woman I can remember told me that she started sleeping on her husband's side of the bed in order to feel close to him. An only child used to sit in her father's chair where he used to watch television because she felt closer to him there. That's adjusting to the environment without your loved one. And then another is when people let go and embrace the loved one, embrace what's happened. And it's an acceptance to some extent. And in theory, this is called continuing bonds. And I'll refer to this in the next slide that's called Journey of Mourning. Next, please. No, it's not the next slide. The next slide is dual process grief. Yeah, if we could go back to the dual process grief, please. No, it's missing. Oh dear. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. It's a pendulation. And when we're caring for people who are grieving, it's important, especially those who are experiencing traumatic or complicated grief, to touch on it. I've made a practice. I don't ask questions like, what has happened? I have heard horrendous stories of people who've died by suicide, and I can't share them with others because they're too painful. I would touch on that barely. If I, I encourage people to touch on it and then move away from it. Touch on it, move away from it. And this is the way we help people heal. It's to honor, but not to overextend it, because that can really traumatize people in itself. Next, please. And this is the slide presentation I'm talking about, called the river. It's the river, the journey of mourning, and this is represented. So pain, the river represents pain, and we have to go through the pain. There's no way around it. That's the reality. And the ultimate goal, in the next slide, please, is what we call reconciliation. Reconciliation, it's not because of conflict, but because of the need for peace. People want peace. And that's what is meant here by reconciliation. Next, please. So the potential for spiritual growth through yours or others' grief. And a quote, consider how you gain comfort and closeness to God, nature, or your higher power and others during times of frightening vulnerability. Gain comfort and closeness to whatever it is that gives you comfort is critical in our spiritual healing process. Next, please. A quote from Tim Farrington. Oftentimes, there's superficiality or shallowness of spiritual notions we believed to be sustaining us, and challenges us to let go of them and go deeper. And that was what Balfour Mount was saying, go from head to heart and acknowledge that maybe you are going through a dark night experience, but yet there's a flicker of light, teaching us to let go of protective ideologies. Often allows us to open for the first time to the nakedness of our real suffering of the death of loved ones. Next, please. So understanding suffering. Don't turn away. These quotes from Rumi and also from Tara Brach, and you'll recognize the first one as close to what Leonard Cohen in his song has said. Don't turn away. Keep your gaze on the bandaged place. There's where the light enters you, and then from Tara Brach again, it's the bandaged place. Without denying or avoiding it, we become tender toward our human vulnerability. Next, please. Living, dying, and renewed living, transformed suffering. Transformed suffering. Again, I hope you're getting the drift of what I'm sharing here is so important in terms of grief changes the griever. Wow. Grief changes the griever. Can we trust that this is the potential in our goal with people whom we work with to help them in their grief? Transforming the suffering. And that's from the renowned Robert Niemeyer. Next, please. A quote from Henry Nouwen, who I love dearly. And where I am injured, it's our injuries. It's critical to acknowledge our weaknesses. In vulnerability, discover potential and spiritual growth. It says farther down, at the sites of my injuries lie also my treasures. Wow. Next, please. So transforming the pain of grief, fear, and despair, healing presence, listening, visioning, or considering possibilities. Next, please. Transforming the pain. And the healing presence. The next slide, please. Healing presence. So in our care for people, again, healing presence. You cannot do healing presence. You can deepen your healing presence and you can encourage healing presence by being, not doing, by being present. And this is critical. I think it's acknowledging our own vulnerability. Next, please. So experiences to be lived through. All of our illnesses, fear and depression as a part of life. In illness, there are no negative emotions, only experiences that have to be lived through. We see, so to say, yes, we see your pain, we accept your fear, is so critical. Next, please. So it's time to pause. Consider someone you have companioned in the dying or grief process. Maybe a client, patient, a family member, or a friend. What significant experience do you remember having lived through? Maybe that will generate some questions in a few minutes. Next, please. Next. So this is a case that I share with you. And the first thing I want to say is I want you to get to know this young man. He's just amazing. I just want to share with you, he has won awards in his life since his experience of traumatic grief. He's an amazing person. I was at his graduation a couple of months ago now, and he is now a successful practitioner in his field. I won't share with you what it is, but he's the key. He is an inspiration as a grieving person. And so this is why I chose this case. Like you might say, well, this is not palliative care. Oh, yes, it is. My definition of palliative care is the care of the dying and the bereaved. And he was very much bereaved. He watched and companioned 5 close friends die of overdoses, and he knew that he could have easily been next. So I share this case with you, and I want to ask you these questions and get feedback on these questions. They're listed there on the slide for you. So feel free to maybe Sheila, not to put you on the spot, but maybe it's okay to maybe help us transition into this discussion.
Do you want me to read the case so that people have it?
Well, I would assume that people have it.
Did somebody say yes, please?
Okay.
Why don't I read it, because it's a fair bit, and that way we've got it in 2 different forms, audio and visual.
Okay, thanks.
So
Sheila.
young man in his mid-20s. So Peter's given sort of the backdrop kind of frame. He's been in a rehab program with possible drug addiction, having recovering drug user over these years, having had these multiple losses of people in such a similar path that it's close to him, and he recognizes that it could be or could have been him. And he presents with a desire to have help with these significant and traumatic losses. Peter, you with him figured out that the most significant of the five was a middle-aged man who was the father of one of his childhood friends. They had always had each other's back. They'd shared what they had with each other when both of them lived on the street at a time. He was very aware that he too could have ended up like these other friends, and was grateful to be alive. He felt he had done almost anything to feed his drug addiction, which included doing requested favors for one of his medical care providers. He recognized that he had compromised his deep, meaningful personal values, including stealing food, and this left him with a criminal record. In the intake session, it was learned that he was the son of an alcoholic who left his family when the father left his family when the client was a young teenager. His mother had continued to raise their children on her own, caring for her children, trying to encourage them to have positive values and faith. The client was the youngest. He had an older teenage sister and an older brother who had mental health issues, and this client, as he grew older, was trying to help the older brother and taking on the burden of that. So your questions then are: identify possible barriers to this man's recovery and healing of his traumatic grief. So possible barriers to recovery and healing. And then what might the spiritual care plan include? And I think I'm also going to insert there, we're from many, many different disciplines, interdisciplines. And so whether it's a spiritual care plan or whether it's your attention to the spiritual needs within that context, include in order to help this client to heal from these significant relationship losses and to recover from abuse and the life struggles that he's experienced. So do you want us to maybe, Peter, go back to the first question, because you had an order there? So identifying what might be possible barriers to this man's recovery and his healing, given this, I'm going to say this litany of traumatic grief, these repeated experiences of traumatic grief. I wonder if our usual practice, we just continue that if you want to put a hand up, you can offer something, and I see that people are already using the chat. Perfect. A barrier might be an overwhelming sense of shame, from Melanie.
Survivor's guilt. That's what that is.
Lack of time for self-care due to the caregiver role, self-medication that will block his ability to connect with his inner self, as being other risks and barriers there. The barrier of relapse, or the fear or risk of relapse. His criminal record, which you mentioned intentionally there, Peter.
Yeah. Yeah, these are really significant barriers. And there was a question just a minute ago about the third of the three things: healing, presence, listening, and visioning, that I hadn't addressed. I envisioned what he was capable of. And that, he told me later, was so important. I had a vision that I could see. I saw his potential when he could not see it. And so these barriers, like you just said, keep him from that, or kept him from that to some extent. So how critical it is for us to believe in our clients, believe in the potential of spiritual growth through these experiences. This is all part of what I consider the really importance of spirituality, especially when working with people with complicated or traumatic grief.
And just in line with what you were just saying, Peter, I was thinking of this idea. We sometimes use the expression that we bear witness, that we are the witness to someone's pain, someone's grief, someone's loss, but this idea that you are bearing witness to something that the client cannot yet see, which I think is very profound.
Beautiful.
I just saw a few more things there. Lack of social structure and support, helpful or harmful support systems. This is continuing as barriers. Unmet needs from his adverse childhood experiences. That one is a vast bucket, for sure. And repeated loss of a father type figure. So somebody's really astutely noticed the loss of father, and then there's been another figure who has also died.
And I think Sheila, that I was intentional in presenting a father figure as myself as a father figure. I supported and encouraged him like he needed to be encouraged when he was 13 years old.
Mm.
That I was intentional about that.
Mm.
And that was an approach that I used.
Lynn has offered the quote from Cicely Saunders, who stated, "You matter because you are you, and you matter to the end of your life." Peter, you might know that quote.
I didn't, but it's profound.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So Sheila, I'm wondering if do we go on to the next
Shift to
question,
the next.
or we could go on to questions and answers, but yeah,
And thank you for the rest of those. We'll just come back and insert them if we've got a little space there. The second question, Peter, so you had asked, what might the spiritual care plan or the attention to spiritual needs be, or what might it include in order to help this client to heal from those significant relationship losses and to recover from abuse and the life struggles that he's experienced? There's a lot of kind of spokes in that question, but I would say if people are wanting to speak, unmute and speak, you're welcome to, or if you'd like to continue, I'm watching the chat here and we'll try to weave.
great idea, Sheila. Thank you for saying that.
I'm wondering if one of the things that I will just use as a segue, sort of a bridge there, is I think that part of the attention to the spiritual needs, maybe this phrase we just used about envisioning possibility. I wonder, that to me is spiritual language, whether it's hoping for, envisioning, possibility, but I wonder, those are like words that come to my mind. And I think somebody began to answer. So Brian, you began, I think, with a barrier, being unable to see the challenge in a healthy healing perspective beyond the heavy litany of past experiences. And then you've said what might be included, having a deeper understanding of one's true identity as soul, eternal and divine. So from one sort of spiritual worldview lens, a very broad lens, I would say many of the traditions speak of that, but that idea of a deeper understanding of one's true identity in a spiritual sense. If anyone would like to, yes, please do raise your hand if you want to speak out loud. And it said his mom instilled faith in him. This could be explored as a way of hope to get through his healing. Jacqueline.
As an identified Christian personally, it gave me a bit of an advantage because his mother is a Christian. And so I could draw on some of his childhood experiences that were positive in terms of his mother being an example of faith. And he very much loves his mother dearly. And that relationship, so that became a resource to me, and certainly helped him in his in his healing and his initiatives. And so it's also knowing when to refer to somebody. If this person had been Muslim, for instance, then I would have drawn in an imam if I could have somebody that I knew could work with him in that.
Yeah. Are there any other thoughts about or if you even are wanting, again, as an interdisciplinary group, just to wonder about the spiritual needs, or name or identify the range of, so somebody has identified, sorry, that's a bad sentence, identified identity as identity and spiritual identity as some of the spiritual needs or the spiritual themes that might be explored. Looking at your question.
There was, yeah, about resources, I guess, and a ritual of saying goodbye. And my immediate thought to that is the book by Joyce Rupp, Praying Our Goodbyes. And she addresses a variety of changes, not just death, in which, you know, a separation, for instance, or a divorce. How do we ritualize that transition? And I think that a spiritual care practitioner or a psychospiritual therapist has learned to adapt and create. We create our own rituals, and as we get to know people in a relationship of trust, then we identify what might be a ritual. I was just recently remembering when I worked at a psychiatric hospital for 11 years, I ran into this client who was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. She had been, her diagnosis was borderline personality disorder. And she can remember her father killing a puppy that she got for Christmas in front of her. And, you know, even to this day, my gut just jumps when I even say that. And what I did was, in working with her, she had never had a doll. And so I found a doll for her, and she felt she couldn't have this doll. And so we worked out, I said, well, can you say goodbye to this doll and I will bury it for you? And she said yes. So it's like, I'm not sure how now, it's years ago, but that was my intuition. And we were creating a ritual together with that doll that she never had. And she still could not allow herself to have that doll. So it's really it began by saying, this is a dance, this is tag teaming, this is really, really an important work. And we feel our way through it lots of times and have to trust our intuition, have to trust our own spirituality, and not to prescribe, but rather to uncover with people their spirituality. That's the goal.
I'm wondering if we can broaden the envelope just to ensure, if there's somebody who's got a question, or you politely kept your question from a bit earlier, if there's anybody who just has a thought or a question that you'd like to offer verbally, if you'd like to just unmute yourself. I don't think there's a rush to the microphone right now, but just unmute yourself and speak to us. Someone is unmuted. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I am not seeing you, but go ahead. Gilbert, is Gilbert trying to speak, or did?
No, sorry, I was unmuted. I just muted myself again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, it's Lynn Curry.
Good.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi, I just really wanted to say thank you Thank you very much for this presentation. I think it's very insightful. It demonstrates the value of spirituality within the palliative program. I believe that you cannot do palliation or bereavement without spiritual care. It's kind of like a vehicle with only 3 wheels. When you add spirituality, we got the 4th wheel and it moves forward. Sometimes a bit staticky, but it still moves forward. I really appreciated how you, to me, you seem to be following the GRACE model, which talks about gathering our attention, recalling our intention, attune ourselves to others, consider what will serve, and then engage and end the relationship. I just have found this a really excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm not aware of the GRACE model. What a gift. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, it's Glenanne Vincent. Having been at the bedside with many people who have passed on at that moment, being there, experiencing it with the family, there's just so many things that have happened with some of the patients that it's really hard not to believe in some sort of an afterlife or something beyond our being in this world. For example, a gentleman that's been in a coma for several days and he's taking his last breath, but before his last breath, his eyes open up and he looks at the ceiling and he has a great big smile on his face. And then he takes his last breath. Like you
Wow.
see these things and you have actually experienced these things. And I find that depending on down the road with another patient, if you can establish a bond that you can share that with them, if they have the same belief or maybe question what's going on. I mean, it's just something that you can share spiritually to add to the dying person or the grieving family to think about and maybe throw a bit more of a spiritual positive light on what's actually happening. Because it is, there's no explanations medically for some of the things that you see at the bedside at the time of a person passing. So,
And I go back, thank you. Yeah, I go back to what Balfremont said in terms of going from head to heart. It's our heart. It needs to be heartfelt. And like when someone says to me, I don't believe in the afterlife. Well, I say, well, what is afterlife? If nothing else, it's after your loved one's life. This is life after our loved one's life. And how can we reframe this? What is the new connection? And I go back to the slides, A Journey of Mourning, and you can find that online, by the way, The Journey of Mourning. It's a wonderful slide presentation from the late 1990s. And I think that it's making that effort towards reconciliation with your loved one. You hear people say, oh, I need to know, are they at peace? Well, let's reflect. And what does that mean? And do you feel a connection with your loved one? This is life after their death, if you feel a connection with them. And I can tell you all kinds of stories about how people, how their grief has been transformed because they've acknowledged in a dream that they've been reassured that their loved one is at peace. It's just amazing. And so to be open, to be an open vessel in our caregiving so that we listen and ask questions and help people see things in just a slightly different way without forcing a belief system on them, rather helping them to discover what they believe within themselves and what works for them. And that's the same way with rituals. It's pointless for us to do a huge ritual that doesn't speak to someone who they have no connection with that ritual. It seems to me to be a waste of time, and there's lots of anger created because rituals have not been sensitively used to care for people's needs when they are very vulnerable and experiencing pain and suffering.
Thank you so much, Peter, for this wonderful presentation. I do believe the chat speaks for itself. I think everybody that has attended today really appreciates everything that you really had to say on this topic. We have shared a feedback survey. A link has been added in the chat. As mentioned before, a recording of the session will be emailed to all registrants within the next week. And we do hope to see you on December 13th for our next session on reinventing ritual, narrative presence, and the ritual nature of the grief journey. We've also included that we do have a standalone coming up this Friday for just to commemorate National Grief and Bereavement Day, which took place on November 21st. We will have a session called Compassionate Companionship, Navigating Grief Together. We would be very, very excited if some of you can register for that. We have included a link for registration in the chat as well for this one. So once again, I'd like to thank Peter. Thank you so much, Sheila, and to the rest of our panelists, and of course to you, the participants, for attending this wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Diana.